Praise be Jesus Christ, and onward with Mary. Good and holy evening to all of you, my dear children, listening to Radio Domina Nostra. I'm reaching you when you're probably having dinner, or maybe you are already at the dinner table, and the time change of this broadcast is due to the bad weather conditions that are prevalent in this part of the Northeast. And since we are with Don Enrico here in Norigiola, and we will have to return to our headquarters. From here it takes about an hour. Then we don't want to be imprudent. For that we decided, given the non-emergency situation, because here we are, also used to this, but we thought of anticipating the catechesis. I then make it known, as I said before, the rosary, that from tomorrow we are in Tre Baseleghe, at the Center of Marian Worship, Little Tabor of Christ the King. Starting tomorrow, we no longer have reason to move from one place to another. Probably, if it goes well. Well, probably. Probably this is the greeting and applause of the faithful who are present here. Some will remain knowing that precisely the catechesis was moved to 7 p.m. and that Don Enrico finished about 15 minutes ago. I said that from tomorrow, except that we will not be when we're not busy with larger gatherings. Those are obviously done in hotel settings. But this will allow us to save money because you have no idea how expensive it is to book a hotel conference room. And then finally we can move in that direction. Well then, this evening's catechesis draws inspiration from the fact that yesterday, when I returned from Rome, taking the rapid train to Padova, it was 3.5 hours. One of the spiritual daughters realized that there was the book of Monsignor Gänswein'S that I said I was not interested in buying. She bought it for me and gave it to me. It was the last copy available. And I saw it as a sign, also because 3.5 hours to kill on the train, I practically finished the book. And so I thought here I have to explain my motivation in doing this catechesis on the book, even though I said I did not want to read the book initially. This book is so nebulous, full of contradictions, and unfortunately also blatant lies. It is really a book that when you finish reading it, nobody comes out unscathed. But who most, I'm sorry to say, who comes out battered with broken bones from this book is exactly Benedict XVI. If it were true, I tell you right away, from chapter 7, because the book is divided basically into 2 sections. The first section is incredibly beautiful, it is pleasant. As I was traveling from Rome to Florence, I think. I read it with great pleasure. Then there are coincidentally the tunnels. They begin because when you go through the Apennines, from Florence, going up to Bologna and up to Padova, with all those dark tunnels, I read the second section that instead becomes something illegible. Just illegible, as I will tell you in a moment. There are 2 completely different sections. A Hamlet, Benedict XVI, emerges, a Benedict XVI who lets himself be seized by the idea of no longer being able to exercise the Petrine ministry because he does not have the strength. I find it truly shocking. For that then, after finishing reading it, I felt that it was necessary for the good that I want for all of you, out of pastoral affection, because I'm sacrificing my life, along with my confreres, for what we are doing, the Caritas Christi urget nos. It pushes us to have to intervene in this hour or so to clarify and to highlight the many contradictions that the book is saddled with. One cannot read this book without being saddened by the repeated attempts not to clarify things. Here I say this because it emerges, as I will now tell you, with clarity. Then the book is divided, as I told you, into 2 sections. The first section is beautiful. It is really at times even moving. Gänswein tells of himself in a timid way, inserting himself as in filigree with the human and ecclesial, theological, and pastoral life of Joseph Ratzinger. He tells of when he became Archbishop of Munich in the 1970s at the behest of Paul VI. he tells of when he then played all his cards, that is Ratzinger, to stay in Munich. But Pope Wojtyla, and this is all true, the first part you can read it, up to page 190, more or less, with some coup de théâtre, as I will now tell you, in a serene way, because it unfolds in an objective way. There are facts and events that are already known, only here and there 𝐬𝐿 reveals something intimate and personal that was not known before. But you read the first part until before the 7th chapter, because you understand it is entitled The Historical Renunciation that Marked an Era. From the 7th chapter, it is a whole other matter. It is full of lies, it is full of falsehoods, and then the work moves with an incredible j'accuse towards everyone. No one is spared in this book, no one is spared. Do you want me to tell you the list right away? And there it is. 𝐬𝐿 has it with Cardinal Sodano, with Cardinal Sarah, to whom he dedicates an entire chapter, practically calling him a cheat. He does not say it outright, but when you finish reading the chapter, you are left with a bitter taste inside, as we will now see. I do not know if I can say everything about the matter of the book written in collaboration with Ratzinger. So Sarah continued to insist that he did it because the Pope asked him to, but 𝐬𝐿 denies that. Cardinal Sarah was able to tell a phone call made just as 𝐬𝐿 was busy with Bergoglio. I remind you that he was the prefect of the papal household, so 𝐬𝐿 was not there, and Sarah could phone the Pope, and Sarah did. Cardinal Sarah, the African cardinal, the one who stopped the reforms regarding the ecclesiastical celibacy, when there was the Querida Amazonia and the Synod on the Amazon, and reveals that Pope Benedict, who was almost into tears, that, let's say, hardens Cardinal Sarah and motivates him to remain resistant to this initiative. 𝐬𝐿 denies everything. If he denies it, it means that evidently Sarah is a dishonest cardinal, a lying cardinal. Meanwhile, I must tell you that to make matters worse, there is the mysterious disappearance of Emanuela Orlandi. You'll remember this 15-year-old girl who disappeared with the alleged involvement of the Maliana criminal gang. It is called that, isn't it? And then perhaps with Ali Agca, the investigative path that involved links to Bulgaria. It was never explained what exactly happened to Emanuela Orlandi and why. 𝐬𝐿 even contradicts Emanuela's own brother in this book. Do you understand what level we are at here? In what should be a communication from Benedict XVI's personal secretary, he creates further mystery and confusion. But pardon me, but in how many days did he author the book? Benedict died on December 31st. Maybe he had the book already. To make it even more peculiar, the book was printed in Tre Baseleghe, the town where we have the Piccolo Tabor Center. These are those things that leave you speechless. Yes, the book was printed in Tre Baseleghe. I am left really speechless. Really, I was shocked. The book was printed, published by PM, but the actual press, the typography is in Tre Baseleghe. I told you that the brother of Emanuela Orlandi, who for years has been fighting to know the truth about her disappearance, reveals a key fact that 𝐬𝐿 denies. That is, the brother says that the famous turncoat butler, look at what situations these are. This book leaves you in suspense and a sense of deep angst, a sense, really, anyone who reads this book cannot wait to make the leap to the church of the great prelate. You understand me? The charismatic church. But I don't know how to say that. The church, the real one, because Benedict XVI, who in my opinion is the true martyr of all these maneuvers of which 𝐬𝐿 might be talking in code, but it's no longer the time to do it. Evidently, we are fed up with codes and mind games. Because the turncoat butler who stole confidential documents from Benedict XVI, do you remember? His name is Paolo Gabrielli, would have, I use the conditional, but at this point, who is right? He would have shown a document to the same brother of Emanuela Orlandi. 𝐬𝐿 instead says that there was no document available about Emanuela Orlandi. So here, someone is lying. Here, someone obviously says things that are not true. Now, as I mentioned before, 𝐬𝐿 goes after the Cardinal Sodano. He takes it out on Cardinal Sarah, and he takes it out on Benedict XVI's first secretary, considering him a Judas Iscariot of Benedict XVI, an ambitious sort, cunningly career-minded, Monsignor Clemens. He takes it out on Monsignor Vigano. This book, I must tell you, barely avoids creating scandals. I would suggest that you do not read it. I say to the most sensitive people, it really leaves you a sense of emptiness, of bitterness. It is not a serene book. It is not a serene book, this one here. It's a sort of 𝐦𝐚𝐿 that almost seems like a sort of, I don't know how to say it, a sort of final report, setting of scores of sorts, of a final revenge served on a cold plate. But that I repeat, that scandalized me in the 𝐦𝐚𝐿s, so wide-ranging, that carries away Gänswein'S is the one addressed to Vittorio Messori. I was amazed. I struggled. I cannot wait to get rid of this book. In fact, I gave it to Don Enrico so he can make sense of it. So we all know Vittorio Messori, don't we? Vittorio Messori, for those who do not know, is a journalist, apologist, columnist. I don't know if you can say an essayist. Very well known in Italian television on TV shows such as Porta a Porta and such. He has written books that have made history, with many bestsellers. There are some very appealing and always timely. He also authored books about Mary, with titles such as Investigate Jesus, Investigate Mary, and those things there. And Vittorio Messori in the 1990s had interviewed Joseph Ratzinger as cardinal, and that book had huge prominence. It was also translated into German and other languages as well. And from that moment onwards, between Ratzinger and Vittorio Messori, a friendship was born that we can define as empathetic, even professional, because the theological position of Vittorio Messori, let's call it, the theological one, was very similar to that of Joseph Ratzinger. When you find someone like yourself, you become friends easily. So you know that Vittorio Messori, some time ago, a few years ago, said that he was invited to have a meal, to be with Pope Benedict as a friend. And then Vittorio Messori told, after meeting him, that he pointed out that the condition of the church was disastrous. We were talking about a few years ago, and that he, Vittorio Messori, adds that the Pope looked at him, then shrugged his shoulders, he raised his arms to the sky and said, more or less, only God can help us. Gänswein'S says that all this is invented. No, I say, if it were true, dear children, the earth has become hell. And the Catholic Church is disintegrated. Gänswein'S says that all this is told in an Italian newspaper by Vittorio Messori, that we all know that it's all false. Vittorio Messori had invented it to get a journalistic scoop, apparently. But this is the Vittorio Messori that you know about? But do you know him as such? Go read his books, and then we'll talk about it. And so Gänswein'S blames everyone. No one is spared. Before going into the second part, I would like to stop with you on the first part. Of course, I cannot go into all of it. The first part is very moving, because I said it tells of the Archbishop of Munich, Ratzinger, with details that are sometimes very charming and jovial. Because it comes out as a portrait of Ratzinger that is not very well known. He was a very fragile man physically. One of the biggest problems that characterized him, however, he lived 95 years of age, so sleepless in his courage. He was not be able to sleep well. He says that the first thing he felt, as a nuisance perhaps, was hearing that Bergoglio slept like a dormouse, and that instead he had great problems with sleep all his life. He never managed to sleep well. Then there's an episode, so he then becomes Archbishop of Munich and practically was made a cardinal with only 2 or 3 other cardinals. He was one of the smallest consistories of Paul VI. small in terms of numerical numbers. So they were all Bavarian, and so when he was made, when he uttered the name of Ratzinger, it seemed almost an omen, because then all the Bavarians are very, as they say, very warm, no? They rejoiced for Ratzinger. When John Paul II forced him to come to Rome, he did not want to go to Rome. He had a hard time adapting to the Mediterranean lifestyle, to Latin culture, given his Teutonic style. But Ratzinger has always been accompanied by faith in God. 𝐬𝐿 seems to have another Ratzinger in mind in what he writes about after the 7th chapter. Ratzinger has always been accompanied by a solid faith in God, by a firm trust in God, and by the awareness, as we too must have, that we are in God's hands. God's plan is always fulfilled in us. So in the end, he makes himself available for this program. Let's call it that, a plan from God. Ratzinger in Rome takes as personal secretary Monsignor 𝐸'𝐵𝐻, but then becomes bishop, and here signs the first. Here begins the first called the 𝐦𝐚𝐿, according to Gänswein. This 𝐸'𝐵𝐻 was an up-and-coming bishop who was a figure that was not transparent. And so in 2003, I think, or 2004, Ratzinger is convinced that since the mandate of prefect of the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith would soon expire, he calls Gänswein and tells him, we both should resign. Because he was thinking of returning back to Germany, he implored John Paul II to let him return to his book writing, to his private study in Germany, to his roots. But Pope John Paul II, until his very last days, did not want to grant him this request. Indeed, more than one person reported that John Paul II had identified Cardinal Ratzinger as his successor. He had also praised him in one of his last written books. Of John Paul II, my great friend, says Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, my great friend. And so, Ratzinger emerges as a man of scholarship in Rome, scrupulous, and not at all that German Rottweiler, as he had been characterized, that Panzer Cardinal, that the narrative of the Italian left, with, let's say, the media and the public opinion manipulation, wanted us to believe. Because Gänswein, and this is very compelling, explains how the prefect Ratzinger would carry out his ministry, in which John Paul II trusted unequivocally. And so, when he wrote the Catechism of the Catholic Church, the most important documents were, this is clearly said by Gänswein, and he's not saying something new. In short, we knew that the Dominus Jesus of 2000, for example, was Ratzinger's. Or the interventions of the Holy See regarding the theologies of Revelation, etc. Ratzinger worked a lot in those years, here and there. He had a very interesting and rigorous method of working, Gänswein says, because he brought together less influential people and had them speak first, while the employees and experts of the congregation would speak last. In short, he was following the logic of the gospel. The first part of the book even delves into the mystical aspects of Benedict XVI. He had always emphasized the fact of being born on Holy Saturday, and was baptized on Holy Saturday. He has always seen this as something that had to accompany him as an omen. Well, today we see that the church is in darkness, in total darkness. And then in the 1990s, Joseph Ratzinger, Cardinal Ratzinger, in the 1990s, the early years, had a stroke. He had a stroke that risked seriously compromising his health, but also his work. And here I was struck by what I'm about to tell you, which Gänswein reports. He had a sister. You know, there were 3 siblings, Georg Ratzinger, the brother, and then also there was the sister, Maria. Maria, the month after her brother, Joseph, had suffered a stroke, the same day had a stroke herself. She died, but Joseph recovered. And Georg says that they ask Georg Gänswein then asks, perhaps this is one of the most biblical passages of the book. If he saw a connection and reports the words of Ratzinger in the first part so vividly that he says, I believe that my sister asked God to take her life, to leave him alive. Indeed, she dies with the same type of health condition, a stroke, while her brother recovers. And then there's the chapter dedicated to the Memoris Domini. And for the first time, he mentions a female figure who was the secretary, who was a cumbersome lady, according to Gänswein. In addition, another episode that struck me of the first part, and so we finally moved to the second, which is the most problematic and nebulous. Gänswein tells that he had these 4 Memoris Domini, one of these, who were all Italian, who were consecrated, who we say looked after him. One of these, the one who was the cook, went shopping one morning there in Rome, and a car runs over her, and she is on the verge of life and death, and finally succumbs to her injuries. And Gänswein says that this death of this Memoris Domini had given Joseph Ratzinger a further reason for great pain. In his path that was truly marked, because he is much more, Ratzinger is much more reserved than Wojtyla. But it seems to me that when a man is destined for certain things, is always on the edge between life and death, between mystery and light. I do not know if you understand me. They are those men predestined by God to great missions, so evidently. Well, now let's go to the second part, that is the one that unfolds from the second chapter, but before telling you, I tell you that I have confirmation I personally believe that Gänswein knowingly utters falsehoods. Why not? I do not believe for a single moment in a Vittorio Missori, as I was telling you, and you can go and look for him if you really want. I hope you trust me. Who would have invented such a story of the dialogue with Benedict XVI? Because if a cardinal doubts a little, but Vittorio Missori, no, please. I do not believe he made it all up. That is, I repeat, it says Vittorio Missori, recounting his meeting, who says to the Pope, Holy Father, here, to put it in my own words, but that is the content. Holy Father, speaking with Benedict, here the boat takes on water from all sides. The church is in a bad place with this government. And Ratzinger answers, shrugging his shoulders and raising his hands to the sky and saying, in short, may God help us. May God forbid. Gänswein says that nothing is true. But I figured out Gänswein, because in the book, Gänswein writes that the Pope goes to visit his brother. Do you remember when he was about to pass on, Georg, that is? What struck us all about that visit was that Benedict was in a wheelchair and lingers on there for quite a while. Careful now. Gänswein emphasizes on the fact that he says that in that time, at that moment, however, Benedict XVI was not well himself. He was not well. What did he have? Well, Gänswein in the book writes that the Pope had herpes zoster. Herpes zoster. Actually, all the newspapers spoke about it. A good number of the newspapers talked about the erispelas, or something like that. Then competent people explained to me that one is a viral disease, while the other is bacterial. How can Gänswein be wrong about such a crucial detail? I asked this question. But now let's finally go, in this last part, to the second section of the book. While you're enjoying the story, yes, there is the question of Monsignor Clemens, the first secretary, whom Gänswein considers to be overly ambitious. There's what there is, but overall proceeds in a serene way. From the 7th chapter, it is a trauma. It is a shock. On page 191, I read, pay attention to what Gänswein says. Paraphrasing Dante, Gänswein refers to the seminal moment of the upcoming World Cup in Brazil. Let me explain immediately. On October 30th, 2007, FIFA had assigned Brazil to host the World Cup of Soccer for 2014. So that when on August 21st, 2011 in Madrid, at the end of the 26th World Youth Day, Bennett announced that the venue of the next edition would be in Rio de Janeiro. It was also specified that it had been considered appropriate to bring forward the 27th World Youth Day to 2013, not respecting the usual 3-year cycle to avoid overlapping with the World Cup. This is the beginning regarding the resignation, the trigger, according to Gänswein'S narrative, why we are all sitting in this muck. It is because the World Youth Day event in Brazil has been brought forward by a year due to the World Cup. No, sorry. Should I continue? We may or may not share the Pope's conviction, but I say this very clearly to clear the field of any misunderstanding. And here the patch is worse than the whole, and here this Gänswein wants to convince himself more than us. It was precisely the question of the personal participation in the World Youth Day to hide in him a reflection that gradually became more and more stringent regarding the continuation or not of his pontificate. But didn't we have any spiritual guides? Didn't he have a couple of cardinals advising him? He had no one to tell him, "Holy Father, this is the devil. It is a temptation. One does not come down from the cross." Excuse me. Mara, forgive me for yelling in your house. No one told the Pope that this was not God talking to him? I do not give, and that it was the devil, if this narrative were true. I remind you that Leo XII had people speak into a horn so he could hear, since he was almost deaf. Pius XI did not see at all. They all died as popes. When Pius XI was dying in the square, there were people who prayed. As he could not stand, it was as if he was literally giving his soul to God. But the Pope is the Pope. My God. The Pope is the Pope. One of his helpers approached him. I was talking about Pius XI, and said, "Your Holiness, you can still hear me?" He had a death rattle, but he summoned some strength and continued because he was the Pope. And said, "Yes, and I want to bless everyone." But let's leave the horn of Leo XII alone and leave the half-blind eyes of Pius XI alone, and we want to talk about John Paul II? What would Ratzinger have gotten out of it if he then decided that because he could not go to the World Youth Day? But I say, are you willing to believe this narrative? Is there anyone willing to believe this? Look, I tell you the truth. I say it here before the Blessed Virgin and my conscience. I do not believe it. I will never believe it. Because if it were true, the Catholic faith is over. And priests do well to go on with their lives, to enjoy their holidays, not to exaggerate as I do. I am a poor soul who speaks to you, who sacrifices his life with the confreres to go far and wide so the Pope could not do it, due to the fact that the World Youth Day was moved up by 1 year, because there was the World Cup. Then Gänswein tries to show that he thought of this thing, he matured it in prayer, and God wanted Benedict to leave because he did not get there. Let us keep reading. The incipit is important. Therefore, the joy that he had seen in the eyes of the countless young people present in Madrid, that the previous World Youth Day, for the vigil, etc., had in fact indelibly consolidated his certainty that a meeting of young people without the physical presence of the Father, of the Pope, would have been incomplete. So, what is the frightening logical procedure? There must be the World Youth Day in Brazil. Is this the history of the Church? No. No, I don't say it. I mean, dear children. But are we Waldensians? But is this the official history of the Church in our day? Since the World Youth Day would conflict with the World Cup, it was canceled. The Pope was enthusiastic to see the faces of young people in Madrid, but since he did not feel like doing a 10 to 12-hour flight, so to not leave young people without the joy of having the Pope, he resigns. Thank goodness someone's laughing, from the heart. I'm also heartened to see some young people smile. This is a unique version of the story. I'll repeat the stunning series of events. While the World Youth Day, according to the personal secretary of Pope Benedict XVI, who then goes on a limb, who has it for yours truly as well, who naturally cannot be named, but it's better that way, because there is the question of Pope Benedict's wearing of the white robes, in which Gänswein'S delves into outright absurdity. I want to declare that I've had enough with the talk of secret codes. This is no longer the time for secret codes. Enough. Now is the time for the truth. Now more than ever, this is the time for the truth. As I was saying, he who had the youth in mind, since he felt he wasn't well enough physically. So the problem was soccer, of course. I don't know. What's his name? The champion soccer player from Brazil. His name escapes me. Neymar. The problem for the resignation of Benedict XVI, we need to take hold of a soccer ball, investigate FIFA. That's it. FIFA is responsible for forcing the Church to move up by 1 year the World Youth Day. And the airline companies who did not explain to the Pope that being Pope entitled him to their premier class, where he could stretch out. Do you know that for John Paul II, they would create his own personal space? You're still on an airplane for sure, but the comfort necessary for a Pope who's made to serve, correct? That is, it's not like the Pope can plan on his own for his creature comforts, like you and I can. Since he is already a priest, because if he snatches souls from the devil, this alone for him is a reason for his existence. And he no longer has a normal, relaxed life, because the devil takes aim at him. The devil puts people against the Pope. He creates hatred against him, events against him, by day, by night. A priest in the tradition of St. John Vianney, or Padre Pio, understood this. If Gänswein'S version were true, they do not want Benedict to be associated with these shining examples. But sorry, are we fools who have sacrificed ourselves, and you who are the Pope, because there was a soccer tournament, and the plane would fly too high, and since you do not want to deprive young people of the presence of the Pope, you decide to retire? I don't know, my dear children, I don't know. And so, here begins this psychological thriller, if I can refer it to that way. If it were true, it is psychotic. It is a preternaturally psychotic. I don't know if Don Enrico agrees, because if it were true, Benedict was subjected to a real, as you can say, a powerful harassment by Satan. But you are the Pope. Excuse us, priests. We're supposed to abandon ourselves to God, correct? I sometimes get fearful myself when I go on a flight. Sometimes I get terrorized, just terrorized. And I also know some famous singers like Adriano Celentano who have never flown on a plane. Because if you're terrified, you will. You'll not do it. Yet I want you to believe me. I've said it other times. I faced this fear. God only knows how. I stood there and said, Lord, you have called me for a work. They're waiting for me to go. Whatever happens, happens. But as I do it, the Pope does not. The Pope. Understood. Not the Vicar General. I don't know what place. This is the Pope. And so, as I said before, the second part of the book starts from a type of reading, in my opinion, of a psychosomatic, psychiatric sort, one that is very, very depressing. The second part begins after this attack in chapter 7. Gänswein begins a work of dismantling things that we hold as certainties in our minds. As he hopes, or perhaps as he believes, making us believe at all costs that Benedict XVI went out on his own. that he thought he could not continue and that he could not handle the physical demands. But he survived another 10 years anyway. Or am I wrong? Bergoglio then, at this point, overtakes him because he is in a wheelchair, the so-called Pope Francis. He cannot stand because of because of a very painful arthritis in his knee. Look, have you ever seen that I must defend Pope Francis? If it were true, what he says? No, think about it. Pope Francis deserves more respect than this because he's in a wheelchair and travels. He went to Canada in a wheelchair. Benedict was not in a wheelchair. Do not give up the lucidity of your intellect. Do not believe this nonsense. Benedict was not in a wheelchair. Bergoglio was. Yet Bergoglio will now depart again. I don't know where he's going to go. He'll make a demanding apostolic journey in Africa, if I understand, in Congo. In Congo, which is a region of wars. He'll go there in a wheelchair. Who did this to? John Paul II. I don't think so. And so therefore, how does Benedict XVI look coming out of this? He comes out looking like, you know that I do not believe what I'm about to tell you. You must understand, indeed, you know that I venerate him. Benedict comes out of this looking like a papetto. There is the Pope and there is the papetto, a sort of feeble Pope. Who was the papetto? The papetto is, how can I describe, a refined, elegant man, but then comes to understand that the job was not for him. The book then proceeds in a shocking way, because at a certain point, 𝐦𝐿 ventures off into the matter of the resignation and the declaratio, and wants to convince himself first on the fact that in the declaratio, Benedict XVI says that he does not refer to the Petrine Munus, but of the ministerium. And this is because he claims to be a theologian. And this is a total mystification because the resignation should follow a set formula, shall we say, a juridical framework. Understood? He can be a theologian, fine, but what does the law say? The law says you must present the munus. They're enough. You have to write the munus. This is the law. Dura lex, sed lex. You can be a theologian, but you have to present the munus. As you understand, since the word munus is not written, and since this is an objective omission that is decisive, for Benedict XVI, we say at this point, if 𝐦𝐿's position were true, God punished him as he deserved. Don't you agree? Do not be afraid to confirm. We are not speaking ill of the Pope because we do not believe this interpretation. I'm only drawing the obvious conclusion. If what 𝐦𝐿 says were true, the outcome, Ratzinger deserved the eventual outcome. He is fine. God has just punished him. He has just shown him with his own eyes how he has reduced the church since he decided that no, he was not able to go to Brazil for the World Youth Day. But sorry, gratia non supponit natura. But is it not written in the Bible that God gives grace to the tired, to the disheartened? Says Peter in his letters. Or is it Benedict does not know the word of God, where it says, let each one exercise the office according to the gift of grace received? Didn't Padre Pio, who even though he was exhausted, lived to 81 years of age, didn't he deprive himself of food, sleep, and drink? Or is suffering only for some and not for all? I do not know that 𝐦𝐿 does not know any of this, but as I said, the question of the Petrine Munus is to be interpreted as a theological analysis. But you understand, who reads a book will realize and say to oneself, this person is going out on a limb. And apart from the accusations directed at Vittorio Missori, historically, he's opening up a huge controversy. I don't believe a single syllable surrounding the 𝐦𝐵 of 𝐸 because I have great esteem for Vittorio Missori. Never, and I say never, would the Missori that we all know, a man of God, reserved, a Piemontese of distinguished pedigree, a real Savoyard, never, and I mean never, would he concoct the story of the Pope. And this issue becomes even more serious, and the attack even more unexpected, against a cardinal. And so nobody is spared from his attacks, the unexpected attack on Cardinal Sodano, because he says, 𝐸, and this is true, which Cardinal Sodano showed, was dean of the College of Cardinals when Benedict XVI resigned. He exhibited so much sorrow because, well, so much regret, but in the Mass Predicendum Pontifex, in the homily, he traced an identikit of a pope who does not retire that does not go away when one is tried. And then Gänswein'S says that this was a low blow. In my opinion, it is done to convince, with the technique typical of the playbook you know, to convince that poor Benedict resigned precisely because he could not keep up. He did not have the stamina. Do you remember the film of Nanni Moretti, who made a film some time ago, perhaps before Benedict resigned? I don't remember the title, maybe someone will write to let us know, in which a pope would be elected who would enter into a profound internal crisis, in an actual psychological crisis, who would undergo psychiatric analysis. I think it was called Habemus Papum. I think it will be something that the great prelate, in my opinion, as soon as the Romans will elect him, immediately he will do a psychoanalysis on himself. Now then, the thing that surprised me is the attack on Cardinal Sarah, who passes for a liar from the pen of Gänswein. Cardinal Sarah passes for a liar, and I'll tell you why. You all know that I mentioned this already, but I will go into more detail. You know, we are over 1800 here, at 7:45. It's not a target, but the issue has a lot of interest, and I'm concluding. So I was saying, you know that there was a synod, the one to abolish the celibacy of the clergy for Amazonia, the synod on Amazonia, and the project to abolish celibacy. And things are moving in that direction, as even Gänswein is forced to acknowledge. Unexpectedly, the figure of Cardinal Sarah emerges, who says that he had authored a book with a long introduction by Pope Benedict XVI. He publishes it, that French type, and then translated by Cantagalli in Italy. There emerges a huge controversy because Benedict XVI intervenes directly to halt the initiative to abolish the celibacy of the clergy. Sarah says that he directly called Pope Benedict and that he received directly from the Pope permission to write about these matters. Gänswein says that the whole thing was a maneuver by Sarah and that it was not true. He claims that when the Pope found out, he was upset, but Sarah contends that when Gänswein was with Bergoglio, he was able to contact Benedict directly and reported that the Pope was at the point of crying for the pain of the attack on celibacy. And so even Cardinal Sarah, as Vittorio Messori and like others are not immune here, in this cruel, nebulous, gray, and metallic book. But if I may say, where Gänswein outdoes himself is when he makes a tangential reference to us. This is when he refers to the papal white robe. You remember that Benedict XVI, Pope Ratzinger, said in an interview, listen to how Gänswein justifies himself. Listen carefully, because when you hear this, you'll want to just get up and leave. You'll say, please, Father, I don't make up. Don't make us waste any more time. That it is cold outside. Now then, the Pope says, I don't have any other garments. I don't have other garments in other colors in my armoire. You remember the stunning statement? He doesn't mention the question of Benedict signing with the abbreviation P. But let's not get into that issue. Gänswein says that this was an ironic quip from Benedict XVI, and almost predicting any objection to this explanation as to why he didn't have any garments in other colors. The answer he gives is because he didn't think he would live so long. Would you want to be the ones to get up and leave? Do you understand? Therefore, all you 80-year-olds, rot away with the garments you have on you now. Why do you go out and buy yourselves a new dress, seeing that you'll end up in the graveyard? The Pope is teaching you this. The Pope is teaching us to have only one outfit of one color. Empty out your dressers because you're going to die anyway. What sense is there in spending money on clothes? After your 80th birthday, the countdown starts. Enough. Wear the clothes you have on and donate the rest to the poor and don't buy anything. This is the official reason he continued to dress in white, because he, Benedict XVI, did not think he would live a long time. And so imagine what pleasant scent he exuded with the only white robe he had, unless other ones were made for him. And so these wretches are trying to deceive us. You understand? This is a narrative that is designed to deceive us, and it is a typical Masonic technique to deceive minds, manipulate consciences. Do not allow them. Do not allow them. It is quite astonishing. I did not expect Gänswein to do this. And so when I was egged on to read this book, then he has time to deride Andrea Cianci's argumentation as being similar to that in Da Vinci's Code. But I don't think he can simply whitewash such a pertinent work in such a cavalier and aggressive way. This is a Gänswein who is not settled in his own mind. What I would like to say in this is that this book does not pay homage to Benedict XVI. Not at all. What emerges is a weak Benedict XVI who quits and is decisive in doing so. It seems that he had told Cardinal Comastri, who was crying when he had accompanied him to the resignation. If Cardinal Comastri cries often, I don't know. In any event, he might be sensitive, and the Pope told him, "Eminence, don't be sad. As a Pope leaves and another takes his place, but the Church belongs to Christ." What the heck? Dear parish priests who are tired, resign, and when your bishop will ask you, why are you quitting? Well, they will answer, of course, a priest leaves and a new one comes, but the parish belongs to Christ. Nuns quit, monks can quit. Cardinals are the ones who do not seem to want to resign. Maybe at some point, since many of them are over 80 years of age, their tailors don't know what to do anymore. Because following the ascetic example of Benedict XVI, given Gänswein's assertions that Benedict did not have robes in different colors, and he used those he had because he had a short time to live. And we arrive at the conclusion, because this book is a parody, it's a burlesque, that does not honor Benedict XVI. What can we conclude, my dear children? We can conclude that we are sure to be in the truth. We are on the right side, because to think that a pope would resign because he cannot board an airplane would imply a Benedict XVI who firstly is lying to himself as a theologian, because he has a special grace as the head of state. I feel it myself, and Don Enrico believes this as well. That is, when God gives you a task, a mission, you can certainly become tired, feel vexed, feel the criticisms and attacks, the torments. But if you have faith, you simply continue. I mentioned many times with the testimony of Father Amorth, and I would ask him, "Father, do you feel that the devil is out to punish you?" He would tell me, "I toss and turn all through the night." He was a gentleman, a gracious, charming man. He said that I cannot get any rest. I cannot close my eyes to sleep. Pardon me, but why don't you not resign as well? He was an exorcist. I get angry because I cannot believe that the Pope did this. I remember that when I went to see Father Amorth when he was in his 90s, seated at his desk, his hand was trembling. He was writing and would always say, "I only have a little time left. I need to make the most of it." What is this resigning because one feels tired? But then, if this interpretation were true, it would be contradicted by the Word of God. Because the Scripture says that God gives grace to those who confide in Him and have an office to fulfill. This would be a denial of grace for the investiture that God assigns. Moreover, it speaks of a metallic corporate vision of the Church. So, a Pope Benedict, who they want to nominate as the new Augustine of the Church, doctor of the Church, resigns because he says that he cannot handle the physical demands? He must have a strictly practical vision of the role, as I have said many times before. Gänswein presents this unflattering portrait of Pope Benedict. At this point, Gänswein is the one who has done the most to obliterate Benedict's reputation after his death. This is because he claims that this is the reason for the resignation. But Benedict knew that the Church is not a company, that is not led only from the sense of corporate efficiency, or else the popes, many of them, were not needed, if you think about it. Let us think of the popes of the modern era. of the more recent ones, no? Paul VI became ill, and he did not want people to know of the tumor he had on his prostate. Poor saintly man. He had this condition that would give him problems going to the bathroom. Then poor John Paul II that would have a saliva stream down his chin and was not aware since his facial muscles had tensed up from the Parkinson's. The church is not a Volkswagen or a Pfizer or a McDonald's. We needed someone to make Pope Benedict aware of this. Look, you're not the CEO of McDonald's who flips burgers. You are the head of the Catholic Church. You are the vicar of Christ, no? 𝐷 Domine? Where are you going, Lord? I'm going to Rome to be crucified yet again, and Benedict over many years had said these things, that the Pope carries his cross. How is it that he said these things and then resigns because he cannot go on an airplane to attend the World Youth Day? You understand that the issue is complex enough that you cannot resolve it so matter of fact. I beg you. And be careful of these unfounded superficial claims, of these useless attempts, because they are useless. I would like to say one last thing. I want to say one more thing as to why Pope Benedict at a certain point, if this interpretation was true, he resigns because in some way he became an idiot, possessed by the devil. So we can surmise that this would be the third secret of Fatima. A pope possessed by the devil, because only Satan could have induced a pope to resign because he could not board a plane and was losing his physical strength. I could be wrong, but we priests, once we reach 80 years of age, when you sacrifice your life, the devil's always there to tell you. But I always remember St. Clare of Assisi. The devil would torment her for her entire life. You'll not arrive. You'll not succeed. It is useless that you continue fasting. You will get sick. The devil plays this card with everyone. He wants to convince you that you cannot succeed, that you do not measure up, that you must stop or else you will become ill. Therefore, it was a vexation, a case of demonic possession. At this point, it is so evident. Because humor me, how do we reach this result? From the simple logic that Pope Benedict did not contradict. Because Pope Benedict XVI knows full well that to govern the Church, you do not need to attend in person the World Youth Day. St. Pius X, who was from this area, he never left the Vatican. But until today, there is no modern pope who is as great as him. There is no need to travel. Could there be a pope who does not want to fly in an airplane, does not want to go on an airplane, and does not travel? And therefore he can no longer be the pope? That is, what induced Benedict XVI to retain that since he no longer had the strength to travel, this would affect his ministry? It is clearly understood that we are in the presence of an intentional interpretation that we are not in the least bit convinced of. This interpretation is trivial, totally trivial and without merit. Moreover, as I said, this book, for those who that cannot see the writing, too bad it's written in small font, the printing was completed at the Grafica Veneta on Via Marcantonio 2, Tre Baseliche, Padua, close to the Little Tabor. This is also written. Just kidding. Another thing I wanted to point out was this book was already ready to be printed? Because there's so many pages. Don Enrico and I asked ourselves. He's very sharp on these things. He made me observe, and I didn't really think about it. And I said to him, "You were right, because pardon me, when did he have the time to write this book?" The book just came out when there were the funeral services. Could he have written the book from memory? It was written previously. And it was a cynical attempt to manipulate us into believing that Benedict XVI became tired. He could not handle it anymore, and so he decided to retire. Honor to Pope Benedict XVI. The truth is, he saw the wolves in the Vatican. He saw the satanic Freemasonry in the Vatican, and he decided to deliver the throne, but retained to himself the Petrine Munus. Now the game is about to be decided. I wanted to tell you one more thing of a personal nature. In the aftermath of Benedict XVI, there is in Latin America a smear campaign against yours truly, yet again. I mentioned it this morning because they were not successful in Rome. They were not successful at all. Because the devil makes the pots but forgets the lids. Now, they're trying, those two that I know where these campaigns start, to spread to Latin America. I've seen videos in which, even though they do not name me by name, but in the fine print they write Don Minutella, that I'm nominating myself as the great prelate, that I'm organizing the primary election, those things that I've mentioned lately. I must conclude in this way before my confrere. In these days, since Benedict's passing till now, I have been completely disinterested, totally disinterested. I'm saying something solemn and sacrosanct that will cause my enemies to tremble. I'm of total disinterest on this initiative on the part of Romans that want to elect a new pontiff, and those things there, naturally with the timelines that are required. I thank Gänswein because this book is so murky, so dark and misleading, full of contradictions, that lead me, dear children, that the moment has arrived. If we want to save the church, and this the Romans need to hear this, to turn the page and with the help of the Virgin Mary, to look ahead while the boat withstands this tempest, and will head to calmer waters and resume its course in history. May Jesus Christ be praised, and onward with Mary.